Hello, everyone. Welcome to the BroadwayCon How to Be an Arts Hero panel, moderated by myself, Eden Espinosa, and we are here with Jenny, Grace Makholm, and Carson Elrod. Hi.
Hi there. It's good to see you, Eden.
Thank you. It's good to be here. We are so excited to sit down and chat with you guys today about everything, how to be an arts hero. So we should we just dive in?
Yeah, let's dive in.
Let's get right in there.
So, yeah. So, I mean, I feel like everyone, unless you've been hiding under a rock, has at least heard the hashtag be an arts hero. And if they haven't, can either one of you just speak briefly about what you've been doing since last summer and how you started and what inspired this movement? So fill us in a little bit on this journey.
Yeah, I mean, we like to call ourselves a kitchen table movement because we really did start, in our own kitchens, in our own living rooms. And it started out really, it was, myself, Carson Elrod, and Brooke Ishibashi to begin with. And we were just concerned because FPUC was about to expire, and it didn't seem like there was any movement legislatively to expand it. And so we were looking around thinking, there's so many arts workers like ourselves that are so heavily reliant on FPUC, that are so concerned because, for things like health insurance, so much of our health insurance is tied to our employment. And so what's going to happen to us? Like, who's going to come and save us? There surely will be somebody, a arts leader of some kind who will rise up and be like, this will not stand, And we kept on looking around and we realized, there are, and that is to say that we stand in solidarity and with the full support of those who have been doing this kind of arts advocacy work for decades, and they are our heroes. But we did realize that we had to be the heroes we were looking for, that we were waiting for, that we were in fact were the people that we were fighting for. And so Brooke, Carson, and I, and soon thereafter, Matthew-Lee Erlbach, started together, and it started really as a social media campaign. I mean, we thought we were going to be one and done. We thought, we're going to make some noise on social media for like a month and a half, and then they're just going to extend FPUC, and then we're going to go, well, that was good. That was fun. We're done. Good job, everybody. And then it didn't get extended. And we realized that our fight was going to be much longer and much harder. And we realized that we had to really address some of the, systemic issues that caused this crisis to begin with. We started out as a social media campaign, and really soon after that, we were really lucky. We got Billy Porter to come and be our ambassador and speak on late night with the Late Show with Seth Meyers, and with some talking, like some morning talk shows. And it really began to, catch hold, and we it was unexpected success. I don't think we were quite prepared initially to be as successful as we were and campaigning and advocating for our sector. And so then we started really contemplating what it would mean to advocate for the entire arts and culture sector. That we're unfortunately, like theater tends to theater, and museums advocate for museums, and movie theaters for movie theaters, and there aren't that many voices out there that are advocating for the entire arts and culture sector. And the arts and culture sector, is huge. It contributes $877 billion to the United States economy, 4.5% of our GDP. And we represent 5.1 million workers in this country. So we're not small potatoes. And so, I mean, I think what we realized in that moment was that this crisis was illuminative, right? It highlighted, or it made clear and visible what had been pre-existing inequalities for a long time. And I think we've seen that throughout 2020, a lot of we talk about 2020 being the year of 2020 vision, that things are brought into perspective. And I think that's been the case for many, many important issues, right? And so what we realize is that the arts have a story problem, ironically enough. That we are considered a luxury. We are considered a side thing that's not really a career. And there's a thought about arts workers that what's the common term, right? Starving artist. Right. And either that, or we're considered like these coastal elites, sipping champagne in our, Malibu beach house. I wish that was true. But the truth is somewhere in between. Like, which one is it? Are we starving artists or are we sipping champagne? And the truth is we're working class, we're middle class, and we're everywhere. There's not a single state in our union that doesn't employ tens of thousands of arts workers. And there's not a single state in our union where arts and culture doesn't contribute billions to their state's GSP. So, when we realized that, it was really easy to start contemplating what our next steps were. So we started a Labor Day of Action. We did a music video with the song Will I from Rent, which
that Eden participated in.
You might be familiar with. And we've just been going strong. We Matthew-Lee Erlbach wrote this amazing letter to the Senate. It's garnered over 15,000 signatures. And we pushed for we were one of the voices that helped push for the passing of SOS, Save Our Stages. And now we're in our new campaign, which is the 100 Days of Art and Activism, mirroring the first 100 days of President Biden's presidency. So that's the briefest overview I can have of what we have been up to.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, it's so funny because I remember, in response to several, elected officials' speeches that are always like, let's get these people back doing to what they love. And I'm like, sir, ma'am, person, it's more than that. Like, you know what I mean? It's not just a hobby. This is our livelihood. So you wouldn't say that to a doctor. You wouldn't say that to a lawyer. You wouldn't say that to an athlete. So yeah, I hear that. And Carson, being ArtsHero is just, one of the many advocacy organizations that have come up since the pandemic and joining pre-existing ones. But there's, BTU, BAC, BTC, Affect. There's just a Broadway for Racial Justice, Be an ArtsHero. And so can you speak as to what you think the impact of all of these organizations are, and do you think that it has and will help this sector moving forward?
Yeah, thanks, Eden. One of the things that we said early on is that you have to have the conversation to change the conversation. And so what's happening right now is there's a lot of people that in the face of the crisis that are stepping up and stepping in. And I'd love to start really micro and then go macro. On a micro level, there's a young man named Kelsey Steele who reached out to us, who we talked to. He was a young actor. He had just gotten his Actors Equity card. He was on a tour. The tour got canceled. He lost his job. He had to move back to Ohio to live with his parents. He very quickly got super involved in his local politics, city council, the state legislature, and he by himself just relentlessly on the phone, pressuring his local lawmakers, going to city council meetings, all masked up, giving speeches, banging on a podium. He was able to secure $100,000 of CARES Act funding for distressed arts workers in Columbus, Ohio. If you look at what Nataki Garrett and Marissa Wolf did in Oregon, a lot of the Oregon arts leaders got together And they went to the state of Oregon and they said, the sector is in trouble. There is no floor beneath us. We are going to collapse without help. And by harnessing their collective power, they were able to leverage $50 million of CARES Act funding in direct relief to get Oregon arts Oregon arts organizations through the crisis. And the thing is, because there isn't this understanding or knowledge or contemplation of the size, scope, power, and impact of the creative economy on a federal level, then it's had to be these micro organizations that have like done this work. But if you look at the National Independent Venue Association that were the authors of Save Our Stages, you have to look at who these people are and what they did. They're part of the creative economy. They own rock and roll clubs. And what they did is they recognized that 90% of their income was completely gone, and they were going, I mean, the floor was out from underneath them. They were falling, and they were able to, what Reverend Moose and Dana Frank and that whole group did is they mobilized state captains in all 50 states. Those state captains would run around and talk to all the venue owners, and those venue owners would go talk to chambers of commerce. They would go talk to tourism boards. And what was the result of that? The result of that was a bipartisan piece of legislation that was introduced by John Cornyn and Amy Klobuchar that contemplated $10 billion for the creative economy. And when it finally passed as part of the compromise bill in December, it went up to $15 billion. Now, if you look at the National Endowment for the Arts funding, since it began to now, and you added it all up together, that is not $15 billion. It's not anywhere close. So if you look at what an organization that did not exist a year ago was able to do with their hard work and their commitment and their organizing and their stepping up and stepping in to address a crisis, I just want anybody who's watching this to know that that could be you. You have that kind of power. You do, your community does, your participation. So often we think, I'm just one person. I'll write a letter. Nobody will read it. It's pointless. No, there are things that you can do when you step up and you step in and you make advocacy part of your life. It can change the world. The idea that there was a hearing in December with Marsha Blackburn, Mike Lee, and Jerry Moran all talking about the importance of rock and roll clubs. I mean, all of a sudden you have Republicans and Democrats having a different conversation about the creative economy. We're talking about rock and roll clubs as small businesses, as local businesses, as jobs creators, because that's what they are. And that's what arts and culture is all across the country. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to work with NEVA. We're trying to work with Americans for the Arts. We're trying to be a convener to bring all of these groups together to find common cause, to make our voices even bigger, even louder, to accomplish even more things. But if you look at what you and Karen have created, what I would call like accountability organizations, like We See You White American Theater, Black Theater United, Affect Change, there's so many good things happening right now because people are seeing what needs to be addressed and they're stepping up and stepping in to address it. So I think that right now we are having a very different conversation with government than we've ever had before. The creative economy is, as Jenny said, $877 billion in value added. It's 5 times bigger than agriculture. It's $265 billion bigger than transportation. So finally, there are people that are just starting to get loud, and that's what being ArtsHero is all about. Is we want all 5.1 million of us to get as loud as possible to get the kind of subsidy, relief, recovery, and investment that we deserve.
It's funny, like every time I hear those numbers, it never ceases to astound me. It never fails. Every time I hear them, and I've heard them a lot, my head wants to pop. It's unbelievable. And I love that, like, it is about agency. It is about empowerment. It is about us knowing that we do have power in our hands, and we are conditioned to accept, well, this is just the way it is, and we don't have to. And I just love that that is part of the conversation as well, the empowerment. And so this is an awesome segue into, leading into the good things, like you were saying, that are happening, Carson. Like there are a lot of good things, and, like, if you will, like small baby steps that have been happening along the way. But it also, long game, seems like there's still a long way to go. And it's, Karen and I talk about this all the time, of like, we might not ever fully see the impact of what we've started in our lifetime, like fully. I hope we do. But so what are some of the things, like short term, that need to happen in order to ensure that the long game continues to develop? What are some short term goals that you guys think could happen?
Jenny, you want to jump in there and talk about some of that stuff?
Oh, well, I mean, I think you can talk a lot more fully about it. What we're thinking about right now is about the infrastructure bill. That's the thing that we're contemplating right now, because that as Carson likes to say, that cake has not yet been baked. And it is so wide in scope. I mean, when you talk about mind-boggling numbers, Eden, I mean, that is a mind-boggling number. The dollar bill amount for the infrastructure bill is mind-boggling. And so they're part of what we're doing when we say you got to have the conversation, change the conversation, is, well, arts and culture is part of infrastructure and should therefore be contemplated in an infrastructure bill. And Carson's been working really hard. So I kind of want to pass the mic to him to talk about specifically what we have in mind.
Well, sure. So there's two big pieces of legislation that are coming down the pike. One of them is the infrastructure, which is $2 trillion. And then following that is going to be a social safety net families package, which is another $1 trillion. So we have $3 trillion in relief and recovery stimulus packages that are on their way. So what we need to understand is, the Brookings Institute did a study called Lost Art: COVID-19's Devastating Impact on the Creative Economy back in July. And they were just looking at what the losses and the impacts were just between April and July. And they were tabulating over $150 billion in losses, over 2.7 million unemployed arts workers. Now, when you consider there's 5.1 million arts workers, that's like over half of us that are completely unemployed. The devastation across our sector has been really horrifying and unimaginable. We still don't know the size and scope of the devastation, but we have a unique opportunity to build back better. Our growth rate is 4.16%, which is nearly double that of the rest of the economy. We also know from studies, peer-reviewed data, Richard Florida wrote in The Rise of the Creative Class, if you want to know where an economic hotspot is going to be, look for where the artists are. 68% of all tourism is cultural. We anchor dynamic, interdependent local economies. We are the reasons why coffee shops and breweries and pizza places, it's the arts thing that starts, and then everything pops up around it to support it. And it becomes part of this really exciting socioeconomic ecosystem. So one of the things that we can contemplate is Jenny Gersten wrote in Bloomberg, build back better with the arts. And she talked about, an example like Mass MoCA, which is a modern art museum in North Adams, Massachusetts. So North Adams was this tiny little town. It was a factory town, and the factory closed like in the 70s. And so there was like a lot of economic depression and local blight that had been there for decades. So when Mass MoCA moved in and became one of the most celebrated modern art museums on earth, it became this incredible destination. And now there's bed and breakfasts and, you know, like cool wine bars and cafes, and everybody loves to go to North Adams. There's a place in South Carolina called Artsfields, which was this super economically depressed little community where a generous philanthropic soul started an arts festival in the summer there. And just by infusing a couple $100,000 in 2013, it got the ball rolling in what has become the identity of this town in so many ways. Crime has gone down, the unhoused population has gone down, educational outcomes have improved, employment has improved. All of this just because of an investment in the creative economy. So you can look at it in terms of like, what if we took every dead factory, you know, while we're replacing all the water pipes, like let's move into dead factories and turn them into mixed use art spaces, theaters, symphonies, burlesque clubs, poetry houses, dance halls, you know, anything. So like that, like is the very kind of nuts and bolts infrastructure, but we've also been part of the coalition of over like 2,500 organizations that have weighed in on the Putting Creative Workers to Work proposal, and Americans for the Arts were kind of the conveners of that, but it's not theirs. They convened all these groups to meet and form this. And the Putting Creative Workers to Work proposal, go check it out online. You can just type Putting Creative Workers to Work. There's 15 different things in there that are a mixture of executive action and legislative action that can talk about you know, a new federal theater project or WPA, or the idea of like artists doing murals inside government buildings. It can get really specific and granular. And there's a really, really big emphasis on providing recovery, relief, and entryway for indigenous, with a focus on indigenous and BIPOC communities who have traditionally been marginalized and left out of these important conversations, to make sure that as we build back, we do build back better with diversity, equity, inclusion as a cornerstone of what we're doing. But all of this could be baked into the infrastructure bill and into the social safety net bill, because that's going to be talking about education. And of course, there's all kinds of like arts education stuff that you could build into that bill. So anybody and everybody out there should know that they can write the administration, call the administration, write your Congress people, your senators, and say, I hope the creative economy is being considered for these infrastructure bills, especially putting creative workers to work, that kind of thing. You can go to beanartshero.com to learn more about what you can do. But those are things that can happen in the short term.
Awesome. Yeah, it is crazy to even notice and comment on people that have stayed in the city, like Midtown, you know, all of our favorite restaurants, all of our favorite bars, all the little like, you know, independent businesses are like gone. And so we really do see how that feeds one another for sure. The ArtsHero has also mentioned often about having a Secretary of Arts and Culture, and that there was a petition that went around, a letter that was written, people signing. And so what do you, from your perspective, what are some of the benefits that we would have having a representative at the executive level there? Jenny's like, me, I want to talk.
I'm gonna share the mic with this one, but I'll take the first part and then I'm gonna pass the baton over. Like, look, as we said before, like, so first of all, just restating the numbers, we're just, at the end of this, there will be a quiz and we're gonna be like, how many billions of dollars? Okay, so like arts and culture contributes $877 billion. It's now more, but that's the newest, the last year's number, to the US economy. And like, as Carson said, that's 5 times more than education. That's $265 billion more than transportation. It's more than agriculture and mining combined. And yet there is a Secretary of Agriculture. There is a Secretary of Transportation. There is a Secretary of Education. So what gives, right? So in fact, we're one of the few nations to not have a cabinet level position for arts and culture. There are over 50 countries that have a cabinet level position for a minister of culture or a secretary of arts and culture. It's called different things, but it means around the same thing. You know, Brazil, Cambodia, Ethiopia, France, Canada, Greece, Haiti, Italy, Spain. I'm not going to list all 50 because, you know, everybody's got things to do today. But what's interesting about this is that, you know, this is not a new idea. This is not a new fight. Quincy Jones has been leading this charge for decades now. You know, he got made the most progress. It culminated in a petition during Obama's first term that was signed by over 150,000 people. And, you know, maybe the time wasn't ripe then, but it certainly is now, because President Biden has set a precedent at the very top of his presidency for altering the structure of his cabinet and those offices that are holding a cabinet level position. You know, he's elevated the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, the director of Office in Science and Technology and Policy, the ambassador to the United Nations as cabinet level positions. He's also removed the director of the CIA from his official cabinet. So, I mean, when we're talking about the time is ripe for real change, you know, and we're certainly dealing with a president that's open to new ideas and new ways of approaching things. He's certainly not going, well, things have always been this way, so that's the way it's going to be. He's definitely not afraid of change. And I mean, Carson can talk a little bit more about what this office could look like. You know, there's a lot of different ways this could manifest itself.
Well, and one of the things to think about is just, you know, these people that sit on the Domestic Policy Council and the executive office and the cabinet, you know, they talk about the big issues that face America, both socially and economically, and then they have a robust conversation amongst themselves about what to do. So like in the last administration, you know, there were trade wars with China, which had a negative impact on farmers. And so there were $46 billion in farm subsidies during the last administration. And you didn't see like there wasn't a necessity for a Be a Farm Hero campaign for farmers to like try to rally their voices because there was a Secretary of Agriculture who was like looking after the sector and saying, okay, this is very important. Like agriculture is going to be in a lot of trouble without a certain level of investment and subsidy. So part of the problem, one of the things Jenny was talking about is there's a story problem around arts workers and the arts and culture sector. Sure, that is true. There's also a representation problem. As Elizabeth Warren said in her campaign, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. The simple factor is, despite the fact that we're 5 times bigger than agriculture, $265 billion more than transportation, we don't have a seat at the table. So of course we're not being thought about. Of course, as the floor has fallen out because of COVID-19, like literally nobody is in the room talking about us or thinking about us, despite the fact that we're 4.5% of the country's GDP and one of the country's biggest exports. But this leads me to like, what would a Secretary of Arts and Culture do other than, you know, take care of the arts and culture sector? The Domestic Policy Council is a really fascinating thing because you have people from the military, from education, from science, and they're all weighing in together on how to address the nation's problems. Shouldn't there be somebody with a big creative, out of the box, imaginative point of view in the room? So I'll give you an example of how that could work. So we talked to Michael Seaman, Professor Michael Seaman, who was a co-author of that Brookings Institute study that we were talking about earlier. And in our first conversation with Dr. Seaman, we were talking about a Secretary of Arts and Culture, how it would work, et cetera. And he said, well, it's interesting. For example, some time ago, the country of Uganda was having a really hard time with HIV testing. AIDS was really out of control, and they were just having a really hard time getting people to get tested because there were social stigmas around it, et cetera, this, that, and the other thing. So they came to Dr. Seaman for consulting. And he was like, okay, let me think about this. So he thought about it and he came back and he said, who is Uganda's version of Jay-Z? And they said, oh, well, it's this person. And he said, great. We're gonna have a huge festival headlined by that person. And they did it. And there were arts and there were crafts and there were local foods and there was free HIV testing and all this stuff that was built in. And so all of a sudden, oh no, we lost Eden.
Yeah, she froze for a second. Let's hold for a sec.
Well, I'll finish my point and then we'll see where we are. And anyway, the point is, they had these radically positive outcomes and they were able to like really get HIV under control because of the testing, because people finally did it. So when you add an artistic element, when you add something creative to almost any problem, you're going to have a better outcome. You're going to have a better solution. And with that, I suppose we should pause and wait for Eden to come back. Well, it's COVID times. It's COVID times, and we've lost Eden Espinosa, which is a bummer. And we don't know, given the technological, given circumstances of our lives right now, whether or not we're going to be blessed with her presence again or not. So Jenny and I are going to continue the conversation amongst ourselves, for you, with you, and we hope that we will do for now. Jenny, this is BroadwayCon. This is a BroadwayCon panel. So, you know, while a lot of our work has been federal and national, and we're talking about arts workers all over the country, obviously, Broadway is such a huge part of New York City, and it's such a huge part of the cultural identity of America. So what kind of things are happening for Broadway? Is Broadway getting the relief that it needs? Talk to me about where Broadway is and what Broadway needs and steps forward there.
Well, I'm so glad you asked, Carson. Let's talk about Broadway, because that's why you all are here anyway. You know, I don't know if folks really understand or really know how big the Broadway community is. Broadway employs over 97,000 full-time employees. Full-time arts workers, you know, and that's not just the performers that you see on stage. That's not just the musicians in the pit. That's not just the dancers. You know, we're talking about the ushers, the ticket takers, the arts administrators, the stage managers, and yeah, the performers, but, you know, also the costume makers and designers, the set designers, you know, many of them are members of one or more unions. So when we talk about Broadway, we're not just talking about the workers, we're also talking about money, and we're talking about big money. Broadway sells more tickets every year than the Mets, the Yankees, the Giants, the Jets, the Rangers, the Islanders, the Devils, the Knicks, the Nets. I mean, all 10 of the major tri-state sports teams combined. That's how many tickets Broadway sells. All 10 of the major tri-state sports teams combined. I'm saying it a second time for emphasis. Approximately around $1.8 billion plus in ticket revenue, right? So, astronomical amounts of money. So, you know, when that vibrant, huge industry went dark, that didn't just affect the 97,000 arts workers, that infected the entire economy of New York City, and especially the Broadway area, and especially businesses like the bars, the restaurants, the hotels, cabs, airplanes, all modes of transportation that rely on Broadway. 68% of America's tourism is cultural. 68%. And, you know, cultural tourists spend 2 times as much. And so for a city like New York City, where so much of its revenue comes from tourism, when Broadway went dark, the city also went dark. And we really rely, this Broadway in some ways is a microcosm of the entire country, right? Because it is a sector in which other sectors implicitly rely, right? So like I said, think about an arts night out, right? It's if you want to go see, if you live in state, let's say, and you want to go see a Broadway show, you might hire a babysitter, take care of the kids, might take a cab, or hop on public transportation to get there. You might get a drink ahead of time, buy some concessions during, and you might get dinner ahead of time, and then get drinks afterwards, and then you got to get your cab ride home, your transportation home. So when we see that in New York City, what happened is Eden was commenting, so many of the Midtown bars, restaurants that we know and love are closed now. And that is directly correlated to the fact that huge swaths of their businesses were relied on Broadway. And so, there are certain, when that happened, it was like a fire drill had gone off. That's what Brian Blythe from Costume Industry Coalition said. They literally, performers dropped their costumes on the floor. And so when we talk about rebuilding and how Broadway gets back, it's going to take more than just considering the performers or the venues themselves. It's considering all of the different arts workers that were also impacted and the correlating businesses. And Carson, you can talk a lot about what that means and what that looks like.
Yeah, well, as we're recording this, literally as we're recording this, the shuttered venue operating grants became available at noon today. And I know that there's a lot of people that are on the SBA's website right now clamoring for those Save Our Stages funds. And, it's important to note that while Save Our Stages constitutes a revolution in how the federal government contemplates the creative economy, it really is just one part of the sector that is being earmarked for dedicated relief. And even within that, if we just talk about Broadway in particular, there's lots of members of the Broadway League or Broadway producers who don't own. And so if you don't own a venue, the shuttered venue operating grant might not be for you. There's also, Brian Blythe from the Costume Industry Coalition, who Jenny just mentioned. He likes to pick up a Broadway program and open it and turn to the last 3 pages. And he's like, all these people need dedicated grants. He represents, 60 costume shops that make costumes for opera and cruise lines and theme parks and Broadway. And they're over $26 million in debt. And they've been completely shuttered with no employees for the better part of a year. For them to get back up and running, for Broadway to be able to turn those marquee lights back on, there is a lot of physical and human infrastructure that needs to start back up. And so on a city level, it's really important that relief that's coming from the American Rescue Plan, I believe 6 to 7 billion is coming to the city. It's really important that a huge part of that be able to go into the for-profit and not-for-profit arts and culture sectors, because it's not just Broadway. It's super important to get Broadway back up and running, but the city has a vibrant cultural landscape. The whole state does. And so when it comes to what's happening in Albany, what's happening in the city at City Hall, it's really important that our legislators and our representatives continue to contemplate the creative economy and get it the dedicated relief that it needs so that we can get back up and running as fast as possible.
You're talking expressly about Revive and Rebuild, right?
Yeah, Revive and Rebuild is a consortium of organizations that have been talking to the Lieutenant Governor's office, the Governor's office, different state representatives and assembly people, senators, talking basically about how do we make sure that relief and recovery earmark legislation from the federal level that came to the states can then be translated into supporting the creative economy. Kind of like what I talked about at the beginning of the conversation with Kelsey and with Nataki Garrett, is it's really incumbent upon us, Broadway lovers, right now, to pick up the phone and call your assembly person, your state senator, your city council member, and say, it's really, really important that Broadway and all of New York's arts and culture sector get the kind of relief and stabilization, so that, you know, when we're all vaccinated and there's herd immunity, that we can get the lights back on and we can get our butts back into the seats where we want them to be.
You know, we had a couple of more points to make, but I think we are at time. So I think in our closing remarks, we just want to give folks who are watching some information on how they best can help Broadway, how they can, and Carson, you touched upon that. You know, you can call your representatives, you can call, there's a couple of things you can do. You can call 202-456-1111. That's the White House, and say you want a Secretary of Arts and Culture. You can sign our Action Network letter. It's on our website. It's also on our link tree on our Instagram. And you can, of course, follow and subscribe to our socials. We always love that. And you can call or write or tweet your senators. And we have a spreadsheet in our link tree and on our website. If you don't know who your senator is, if you don't know their contact information, we make it so easy to find that. So did I miss anything, Carson?
I don't think so. We're really, really honored to have been asked to be part of this panel. We're really, really honored that to be partnered with BroadwayCon. We're honored to have been partially moderated by the incredibly talented and amazing Eden Espinosa. And please be an arts hero yourself. You have so much power. Believe me, go to beanartshero.com to learn more how you can get more involved. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.